Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. Here's a look at current weather conditions across the US and looking over this week and into next week. Right now, the really story is significant ridging across much of the western US, significant troughing across much of the eastern US. So very warm out west, very cold out east. This trough that's now in place across the east brought significant severe weather across middle portions of the country, significant snowfall to the Great Lakes region, and in its wake, a brief period of very cold temperatures. And we can see this with current conditions and some of the watches and warnings from the National Weather Service, looking at what we've seen a lot through the last few months. Elevated fire weather concerns across the lead of the Rocky Mountains into the southern plains. Anomalously warm temperatures for a lot of the Southwest, even out along the coast of California. Temperatures into the 80s and 90s inland, even exceeding 100 degrees over the next few days into this weekend. Heavy rain falling on top of recent heavy snow across parts of the Pacific Northwest will create some flooding concerns over the next few days as well. Before we kind of jump into the forecast, I do want to highlight what we did see over meteorological winter, what we consider December through February. And this has been a lot of what we have heard of how warm it was out west, how cool it was out east. And I think really what really stands out is just how warm it was across much of the central and western US. 9 states saw their average statewide temperature the warmest it's ever been for a winter season. For record keeping, this is going back to 1895, and we're able to leverage as many observations as we can. 9 states saw their warmest winter ever. 5 states saw the second warmest winter, and then a handful of states saw the top five or top 10 warmest winter as well. And below average temperatures, but not the coldest, certainly, but some pretty cold temperatures for mainly the Northeast and parts of New England. Over the winter months, as we saw some pretty significant intrusions of the polar vortex into the Northeast. So very warm across that. The western portion of the U.S., when we look at current snow conditions, we're still seeing pretty poor snowpack as we typically start to see this melting off. It's already in really poor shape. Much of the Southwest is 25% or worse. So very low. Generally, the more north and east you go across the western U.S., the better the snowpack is. So portions of Idaho, Wyoming, Montana are generally doing better as you get further south and into Utah, Colorado, Nevada. And then as you go further west, as you go into further west Washington, we see the snowpack generally 75 or 50% or lower. So it's going to be pretty hard to make up for this. We are looking at potentially some winter weather for the northwest portions of the U.S. next week. And as we look sort of at the hazards outlined by NOAA for this week and into next week, there's a few things to call out. One is heavy rain and flooding potential across parts of the Pacific Northwest. We'll go into that a little bit more. Continued wind concerns on the lee of the Rockies. We've seen a very windy winter and early spring across the lee of the Rockies from Colorado up into Montana, and really the very warm temperatures likely across much of the Southwest this later this week into this weekend. And beyond that, as we look further out, a different portion of NOAA looks at longer ranges, and there's a few things to call out. Pretty significant storm system moving into the area mid to late next week. It's going to sort of start by bringing some potential for heavy snow to the higher terrain of the Northwest, increasing signal for some really strong winds across parts of the central U.S. and then eventually into the eastern U.S. And then as that ridge kind of breaks down and shifts east, we'll see very warm temperatures across the Southwest, expanding eastward into south central U.S. next week. So if we look at the forecast right now, as I mentioned before, where we're starting right now, we have this very significant trough across the eastern U.S. It's been bringing severe weather, major winter weather. That is now lifting off to the east, ridging and significant ridging across much of the west. And what we're seeing right now with the significant ridging, pretty enhanced jet stream, the northern branch of the jet stream, pretty enhanced. So we're seeing some pretty good moisture advection into the northwest. That's bringing warmer and rainier conditions on recent snowfall. So again, some flooding potential for the rivers in the northwest. And as this evolves over the next few days, really kind of a parade of storms, just enhanced flow across the northwest U.S. into British Columbia and Alberta. Troughing generally continues across much of the eastern U.S. So that's going to bring kind of on and off chances for some winter precipitation for northern Great Lakes and Northeast, while it remains warm and dry for much of the southern U.S. And then as we can kind of continue to go, I'll just highlight as we go into mid next week, we're looking at a pretty likely significant trough coming into the Northwest. If we look at before I break this off, we go back. Showing just the GFS. We're looking at 500 millibar vorticity before. If we look at mid levels, around 500 millibars, if we look at all ensemble forecast solutions and we aggregate those together, we can look at sort of what the different clustering of scenarios looks like as we go into next week. Pretty strong signal that there's going to be a noticeable strong trough moving into the northwest US next week. There's some small differences in the timing and magnitudes, maybe about a fifth of the models keep a more zonal flow that would be a little bit weaker in terms of precipitation potential, but overall, pretty significant troughing in storm system expected for next week. Again, heavy snow to the northwest, potential for the mountains, and then wind is really going to be the big concern. Beyond that, I mentioned before with this rainfall, we're going to be seeing a couple rivers approaching minor to moderate flooding, mainly the Snoqualmie and Snohomish rivers across western Washington, seeing some elevated river conditions too, where we have seen heavier rain from some of that severe weather across central parts of the U.S. as well. If we look at sort of the atmospheric river potential, we are looking really the strongest of moisture advection and heavy precipitation will be across much of British Columbia, kind of this moderate category atmospheric river into the northwest as well. So when we already looked at the mid levels of the atmosphere, I do want to call out what the temperature anomalies look like. If we look at 2 meter temperatures, those are our ground near ground temperatures, very cold temperatures, well below normal for much of the eastern half of the U.S. for the next couple of days. But that moderates pretty quickly, and then we see really this heat dome or very significant ridging and area of high pressure across the western U.S. Temperatures on the order of 20 plus degrees above average. That sort of expands east into the central U.S. later this week, into this weekend. Temperatures 30 plus degrees above average, so very warm, 70s, 80s, even 90s for parts of the southern U.S. That continues to expand to the east, and then we see this breakdown as that trough begins to approach into next week. We see generally cooler conditions building into the northwest. Overall, it's going to stay warm for much of the southern U.S., more near average or a little bit cooler for parts of the northern U.S., especially as we go into next week. If we look at precipitation potential, both just total precipitation, we're seeing, light to moderate amounts across much of the northeast quadrant of the U.S., much heavier amounts for the Pacific Northwest. And then as we go into next week, we'll see that expand as well. Again, some uncertainty as to the precipitation type for next week, but could be looking at some heavier snowfall later next week for the Cascades, namely. We'll see some light to moderate snow across parts of the Northeast through this week.